This is the Ecommerce Braintrust, a podcast about building momentum online for established consumer brands. Join our hosts and their expert guests for high-level conversations about e-commerce strategies, trends, and innovations. Access our Braintrust and boost your brand's e-commerce potential.
Welcome to the Ecommerce Braintrust podcast. I'm Julie Spear, head of retail marketplace services at Acadia. I'm joined by two guests today, Perry and Oskar Kaszubski, who together founded Firstmovr to help empower organizations and leaders in their omnichannel education and change management journeys. Today, they'll be sharing some of the key takeaways from their recent in-depth report on practical use cases for how retail businesses are leveraging AI in their day-to-day. For those who haven't yet seen the report, it's called the MAITRIX, Retail Revolutions. And somehow it manages to succinctly sum up where we are as an industry with AI, all while looking like the next installment from the MAITRIX film franchise. Very nice graphics throughout this report. So with that, welcome, Chris and Oskar. I'm glad to have you on the podcast today. Chris, do you want to tee us up and share just a little bit about yourself before we dive into the questions? And then Oskar, you can take it from there.
Yes. Thank you so much, Julie. Really excited to be here. Again, my name is Perry. I'm the Chief Learning Officer and fellow co-founder here at Firstmovr. And again, I always love to share our mission because that's why we do what we do. And while omnichannel and e-commerce was kind of that first wave of change that Firstmovr has focused on over the last 4.5 years of helping organizations across the board accelerate in the space, AI is one that obviously permeates all channels, all functions, all capabilities, and is really that next first mover advantage we all need to get. So I'm excited to be combining a little bit of everything together as we focus on this area, but obviously can help everyone in the broader omnichannel space as well.
Love it. It's great to have you. And Oskar, how about you? Do you want to share a little intro as well?
No, sounds good. So if you think about Chris and I, Chris is always on Earth thinking about how to prepare everybody to leave to Mars and why they should leave to Mars. And what I'm doing is I'm just building the colony on Mars, which probably in 50 years, Mars will be renamed as Musk, Planet Musk. Watch it, that probably it's going to happen. But no, I'm a super techno geek. Not surprisingly, I'm always constantly thinking about what's the future, what that's going to look like when it comes into things like consumer experience. What is the next turn of technology? Like, are we going to be stuck using cell phones and apps forever? And of course, the answer is no. That's kind of what I do, just constantly thinking about how can we actually bring that change one step closer. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, it's great having you. And I love the metaphor really of retail media and marketplaces being out of this world, otherworldly, and trying to wrap our mind around it. I think that's very apropos. And it's a great segue to our conversation today focused on AI. Oskar, given this is your zone of where you're focusing your energy, I think I'll direct my first question to you. AI is a topic that has a lot of buzz, but it's one that's really hard to kind of parse in terms of how much of that buzz is actually warranted. We've all seen that SaaS solutions now seem to throw around the term AI because it makes them appear innovative, whether or not really there's any AI adaptation actually happening. So I'm curious, after doing all of this research, did you find that the actual adoption and application of AI was higher than expected based on the industry hype, in line with the hype, or something that's mostly hype but hasn't quite crossed the threshold into application or widespread adoption as of yet?
It's a great question, but I think where we are at the moment is we are willing to kind of jump on the bandwagon of hype. And we are willing to try anything. But the problem that we're actually having is that most likely AI at the moment is way overhyped versus where we can actually get to a scalable corporate results, because it's very easy to basically have a proof of concept for maybe one SKU or two SKUs. But when you're actually trying to think through this and scale this across thousands of SKUs, thousands of different categories, different geographies, different retailers, this is kind of where we're starting to see a lot of those roadblocks coming in, where AI lacks, number one, consistency. And number two, we're still fighting as brands with this whole notion is that AI is either too creative or sometimes it's too stringent when we need it to be both. And AI is actually struggling with finding that balance, for example, being both creative and both stringent at the same time, because sometimes we need both. You need the left brain and the right brain. And I think we still have to kind of work this out. What's that going to be? But I would say as an industry, and this is my feedback to all of the vendors that we're actually working with, we really need to dial down the marketing because we are way over promising and massively under delivering, which I think we need to kind of reconcile this to making sure that we actually setting the right expectations to the users. And we got to make sure that basically everybody has a great experience.
Yeah, when you say like creative versus stringent and that balance of the left brain and right brain, really that comes down to nuance, another way of framing it. And so to say that what AI is lacking in the realm of nuance, that makes sense to me. That has been my experience of what I'm seeing as well.
Yeah, a good example of that is if you think about content for brands, because on one hand, we want to make sure that we use the creativity of AI because AI can be very creative. But on the flip side, we want to make sure that AI is actually following all the legal guidance. For example, disclaimers, claims, disclaimers, no-go words. And it's really hard to write the prompt that can actually be creative as well as follow instructions to the dot at the same time, even if we use temperatures. And even if we, for example, use different GPTs and split this process into two parts, guess what's going to happen is the GPT that's going to be more stringent is going to basically kill a lot of the creativity that the first GPT did. That's the balance we still got to find.
Nothing to it. Chris, you have a concept in the presentation called the AI go-to-market loop. Can you describe what this means?
Yes. So knowing that this is a podcast and everybody's listening, I'm very visual. So if you want to download the MAITRIX and this loop that we're going to describe here, all you have to do is go to firstmovr.com, firstmovr.com/MAITRIX. But the A is AI, so it's spelled wrong, but spelled right when we're talking about AI. And the MAITRIX, and you don't have to sign up to get it. You can just download the PDF that has these models in it. But there's a lot of research that goes behind these, but we just gave you kind of the overview of it. But basically, the MAITRIX is two parts. It's the ecosystem map of who's out there today. It's not an exhaustive map. So if you know of a company or if you are a company who's not on that map and you want to be there, please reach out to us. Again, to that point Oskar was making, there's a lot of people talking about AI and not necessarily actually implementing AI, or it's, I want AI to be in it, or I want it to be a bigger part of the capability, but it's not quite there. The key is first to lay out the map, and we've got it. Honestly, the MAITRIX is a matrix with 4 quadrants around technology, shopper engagement, operations, and measurement. And then there's kind of 3 rings in the middle, if you will, around your proposition, your presence, and your promotion. So we've kind of laid it out just like who's out there. But then who's out there doesn't necessarily play into my go-to-market strategy, my process for how to bring it to life. So we realized that we really was kind of an infinity loop when we think about our traditional consumer journey. And we thought, why not hearken it back to things we're already familiar with so that AI isn't so foreign or so out of this world, right? It can get a little bit closer. And really, while not trying to overdo kind of the 4 Ps of sales and marketing, so to speak, we really kind of ended up with 8 Ps because you've got your platform or the platforms, who you sell through or what you sell through. You've got your proposition, which is what you sell. It's what you offer. It's your presence. It's how you show up. It's your promotion. It's how you drive demand, media, retail media, paid search, trade promotions, you name it, eventing. It's your performance, which underpins all of it, how you measure, right? We are what we measure. And then we kind of bucket the last underpinning part of the loop together, but it is the people, the process, and the partnerships, which then play into those players in the ecosystem, again, from agencies to solution providers to retailers who bring that to life. So you can imagine an infinity loop here because, again, different players may have AI that supports different parts of the map, even though they're really known for one part on that ecosystem. They actually help multiple parts of this loop. We just thought that was a helpful way of organizing, again, in alignment with principles that we all understand, but with practices and capabilities that might be new and nuanced, to your point, Julie.
Excellent. You set a good foundation which is hard to do when everything is mapped out visually. You've verbally laid the groundwork here for the conversation, which was helpful. And one of the parts that you mentioned was platform. I'd like to dig into platform a little bit more right now. You highlighted that in the report as the backbone of the AI movement, where all the largest tech players are building AI-based platforms for all sorts of applications. One of the use cases you highlight as near future is an evolution of retail media. Can you talk about what this evolution is and how you foresee it playing out?
You bet. And actually, it's funny because to Oscar's point, I always try to be the astronaut on Earth trying to help Earth get ready to leave, and he's on Mars looking at the longer term of terraforming the planet for human life. When you think about the short term, and retail media is such an interesting one, right? When we think about the platforms we currently sell through, it's traditional retailers and marketplaces, it's social commerce, it's direct to consumer, it's our traditional go-to-market approach, not to mention physical retail as well. So we could get into all those nuances. But if we just think about those current platforms in the short term, if I'm an Amazon and I'm launching my AI-assisted search Rufus capability for shoppers, or if I'm Instacart and I've launched Ask Instacart in iteration 1 with plans to launch in the future, if I'm using AI to change or enhance a shopper experience on my current available platforms, will hopefully enhance the experience, which is great. And that's a great outcome for everybody. But if I suddenly don't have paid search placements because I'm not searching the traditional way and being shown the sponsored placements intermingled with the organic placements, but I'm getting a very customized response, almost a conversation back to me on what I should buy, I'm kind of bypassing, maybe unintentionally, my monetized media capabilities if I'm the retailer who launched that capability outright for the shopper. So on one end, I'm creating a better personalized, relevant experience, but I've actually created a bridge over top of my original experience where all my traditional monetized media offerings are, which then means I'm losing opportunity in that very short term to engage the consumer and the shopper with my brand advertising budgets and whatnot. And that means the brand advertisers are now not able to reach all of that audience. And it's still a little bit of a black box. The positive, though, I would say is the retailers have immense incentive to figure that out really fast because they want the AI piece, but they don't want to lose the extremely high margin, high profitability retail media investment opportunity. They're going to figure out a way where perhaps there's a personalized AI assisted response, but yet there's also some select relevant sponsored placements within that experience that are still tasteful. I would say it could impact in the real short term what paid media is available, but I think retailers owning a lot of those platforms will figure it out. But the longer term poses some other interesting nuances. Oscar, what are your thoughts on that?
On Planet Musk, few things can happen, right? Number one is, if you think about it, the question is, what's going to be the evolution of how we are interacting with technology? Because if, for example, if we are going to use AI-specific devices, think about those AI devices very similar to the movie Her, which basically you have an earpiece, you can talk to it, maybe down the line you can think and the device can actually act, and maybe you have a small screen just to be able to see a few things. If it goes that way, all of those orders can be basically automated, where AI is actually making purchases on your behalf, and it's going to the Amazon store and it's clicking through all the different icons, adding to cart, etc. In that kind of a scenario, the retail media piece will have to be completely rethink. A lot of people will say, well, Oscar, those AI gadgets struggling to get kind of a mass adoption. Maybe it's a little bit too early. Maybe we'll have to wait for maybe XR, AR glasses so you can actually see it. But if you think about it, I do think that all of those AI gadgets are actually showcasing people that this whole world of phone being tied into apps, every single apps requiring a login and registration and updates and being very frustrated experience, it's going to push people and even mainstream manufacturers like Apple to create, for example, Siri that can actually navigate the phone for you and execute on some of the commands, including shopping. And in this situation, it's a very conservative scenario. You still have to kind of rethink what the retail media piece will look like. Because right now, The whole retail media industry, of course, talks about the fraudulent clicks and fraudulent impressions, etc. But think about it this, if you actually layer AI on the top of it, that's going to make matters worse. So from that perspective, no matter what the future is, I still think retail media will have to evolve quite a bit. And there's going to be a big question. Can the retailers actually see difference in traffic when it comes into a human looking and scrolling through their store app, or maybe AI? From that perspective, I honestly think retailer will have to figure out some of the new tricks, and maybe there will be some sort of a trafficking, maybe some special API that AI will have to use it, which AI might get charged for it. I mean, there's a lot of different ways of actually monetizing it, but it's definitely going to be interesting.
However you look at it, the hypothesis is the layers of complexity will increase in the long-term vision of the implication on retail media.
100%.
One of the ways that many of us have experienced using AI, I know personally, it was my entree to AI, was in our personal lives using something like ChatGPT to take a lot of information and kind of synthesize it into themes, helping plan vacation and all of that. If we think about this from the perspective of brands, we often find the challenge our clients face is not one of data availability, but rather taking the data and turning it into something that has a cohesive narrative and actionable insights. I'm curious, Oskar, what you're seeing in terms of brands using AI, either for qualitative things like sentiment analysis of customer touch points, or more quantitative things like ad optimization and category performance analysis.
We definitely see some things that are easier to execute versus other. If you, for example, wanted to extract insights out of social media or maybe out of product reviews on specific retailers, I think AI can actually do at the moment a great job. And even from the ad optimization under specific guidelines, etc., it can do okay job. Again, you're going to run into the same issues with compliance and claims. I would say it's more of an ad production versus like 100% ad creation. We are definitely, as I mentioned at the beginning, way overselling AI capability is definitely when it comes into things like performance analysis. And a lot of it is because the tokens that are at the moment available to us to use, the Google Gemini has actually the biggest token block, which is 2 million, is laughably low. It's basically borderline useless. And the problem that we actually having at the moment is because AI is basically like starved out of the actual data and the full context. That's why AI is hallucinating, because it's basically making up information based on the data that it doesn't have. So I think number one is like when I actually look at Google keynote and everybody's clapping because the CEO of Google said that they are reaching 2 million tokens, it's laughable. For us as brands, we're dealing with much larger data sets. So that's number one. And I think when I hear Google CEO is actually mentioning is like, well, in the future, maybe we'll have unlimited context. Well, unlimited context, it might be very hard to get to it, but we definitely need to be in billions and trillions of tokens versus millions where we are at the moment. So I think when you hear anybody basically saying is how AI is going to be wonderful to be able to extract insights and provide new analysis, really keep it with a grain of salt. And think about it this way. At the moment, for AI to actually have any insights, it cannot actually absorb all the data, so it has to basically query. We as end users using any solution have zero visibility. What is the query and what is the data the AI is actually asking, or what is that system that has been implemented? So we don't have visibility of it. If we ask a follow-up question, basically AI has to have a context fed back to it, return context. We have no visibility in terms of what is the context of reframing this question. Is this the right context or not? So in that kind of a situation, it's going to be very tough for us with the limited tokens of the data that we have at the moment to have reliable analytics platforms that can actually look at category performance and being able to mix and match multiple data sets from multiple sources and making sure that this is accurate. And I honestly think if I think about what people will be get burned on AI, it's at the moment at the analytics. So if you hear anybody saying is like, oh, this is going to be great for the future and can happen today, really take it with a grain of salt until we actually have much larger token models, again, hitting not even billions, but even in trillions. And then one example I can give you is our friends from Profitero. They always say they scrape every day 24 terabytes of data. So think about it as 24 terabytes, that's a massive amount of data. And basically, one token is basically 4 bytes. So again, we need these tokens in trillions to even absorb one data of all the data that Profitero is scraping.
A theme I'm picking up here for sure, there are a couple themes. One being that because the industry is moving so quickly, AI is kind of running headlong and moving so fast, but every AI integration isn't necessarily going to be a win. Kind of piggybacking off of not every AI integration is going to be a win. It's inherent on all of us to, like you've said multiple times, Oskar, is to manage our expectations, to really understand what the potential is, what the reality is versus what we perceive the potential to be in terms of the AI solution offering.
Yeah, no, 100%.
Well, then related to that, Chris, I'm interested in your take around AI implementation. It's not simple. What are some of the guardrails that companies should put in place when approaching an AI-based deployment or integration?
That's a great question. I think there's a couple different things. And again, they're not all completely playbooked out yet because, again, I think every implementation, as we think about that loop, involves different types of data. Some of it's consumer data, some of it's proprietary financial data. There's so many different aspects of it that get into some complexities, especially on the legal front. When we are using public facing tools, I know a lot of companies already have yes, please feel free to use ChatGPT for your own personal use in these use cases, but obviously do not use it to analyze our financial profitability data or our P&Ls, or don't put consumer information in there related to our CRM databases and whatnot. I mean, we're just scratching the surface on what's possible. But I think the hard part is in the short term of any new change, there's always a lot of don't do this. When you hear a lot of don'ts in a world where you might lose your job, if you did, you don't, because you're I'm not touching that with a 10-foot pole because I'm going to get in trouble. And so it's easier not to do it when I still have a way I've been used to doing it. Even though I love the hype and I want to learn about it, I might do as much as I can on the side, but I can't really do it at work. Companies need to make sure that they lay out in each area of implementation. And again, it's going to be specific to leveraging AI with a capability partner, a solution provider. It's going to be specifically, how am I using this to develop content for my digital shelf or for my retail media campaigns? Or it's going to be using it to analyze consumer sentiment from our reviews. If there's a third-party partner involved, it might be a little bit easier because one might vet their approach as opposed to your approach. It might be using their scraped information and their capabilities versus us developing our own. But we need to make sure that we have a list of do's and don'ts, and then that there needs to be a lot of training and upskilling even in the short term on the initial uses or use cases, but not just training on AI overall. I mean, we do a lot of trainings for companies on 80 something different topics, mix and match and customize depending on the audience and the need. But AI, yes, needs to be understood at a high level, just like we needed to understand e-commerce 5, 10 years ago for some companies, even recently, like the broader organization. But there needs to be training on what it is, what it's not, how it works, why it matters, what the potential is, but also the actual process training. Because again, I can learn about omnichannel best practices, but not actually know how to bring them into my team. And it also goes back to KPIs and accountability. And that may be putting a specific person in charge, almost like an AI czar, a project lead on that specific implementation. But it's also, how are we measuring this specific use case and doing test and learn so that in the test case, we feel more comfortable trying it out, figuring it out, and then maybe making it a little bit more of a formal and official process.
Education is the basis to all initiatives and changes being a success. And I like how specifically you teased out all the levels and types of education needed to make this worthwhile on the side of brands. Piggybacking off of that, do you have recommendations for brands and listeners in our audience that might be fighting the change management issue that we all come up against when trying to bring their organization up to speed on AI adoption? Obviously, stating the case of the need for education, but are there other pieces of advice that you could offer, Chris, to help get buy-in?
Definitely. So We do a lot of change management, education, advisory, content. Again, thought leadership is a word that we look to earn as opposed to say we do, but hopefully we earn that by bringing some of the best stuff together. But we're not change management necessarily like the big four consulting firms, not that they're not amazing, but we are practitioners. Oskar and I both have led and built CPG, e-commerce, COEs and organizations at 3 different CPGs ourselves, in addition to our past experience and in-between experience. We come from what can I actually do to drive change? And interestingly enough, there is kind of an academic formula that isn't theoretical, but is actually very practicable, if you will, actionable, that we've actually put into a story before. It's our Sheared series about shedding your coat of corporate conformity. But that's its own piece of content in addition to this matrix. But it doesn't matter what change it is. Any change can be activated with 8 core levers of change. And you can measure those qualitatively, like, do I have those in place? And then you can start measuring those more quantitatively, like, how well am I doing those? And education is a big part of that, right? Upskilling, capability building, not capabilities from a solution provider perspective immediately in that bucket, but more of a training the talent, upskilling the talent. I would say that's an enabler of the 8, really, that's underpinning it all, is how do people know what to do and how to do it and feel empowered to do it. But the other 7 are executive commitment. It sounds really basic, but are all levels of the organization that are relevant to this AI implementation or whatever the next change that comes, have they stated publicly their commitment? Are they actioning that commitment? And you can measure that. You can say yay or nay, or hey, only this leader did, but not these other leaders who are kind of critical stakeholders. It's having what we call focused leadership. It's, do I have someone dedicated to bringing this AI implementation or this process to bear, right? Every e-commerce team started with a lead, a project lead, a head of the team, a head of the COE. You need somebody like that too. It can't just be someone's part-time job, even though that might be the half first step, but it's making sure you have people focused on that own it even before the organization does. It's setting an ambitious vision, but complementing that vision with smart strategies and goals, actually putting the smart goals in place and making sure AI is attached to the real strategies we're trying to achieve for the ultimate vision that the company wants to achieve. It's making sure you have the right resources and investment against it. It's making sure that you're assessing your performance, in this case around how well AI is improving your progress or your performance, and then communicating that, right? Half the time we do all this amazing stuff in silos, and most of the organization doesn't even know what's happening. Also, but very important, is organizational enablement. And some of these sound like fluffy buckets, but they're not. They're really critical. The number one way to make someone change what they do is to change how they're measured. While assessment and communication means I'm assessing my performance and then communicating it out, that didn't mean I held other people accountable in their performance reviews, their ability to get promotions, how they get their incentives at the end of the year. So this 8-part structure, it's academic in nature, but you can put real components against it for any change. E-com, social commerce, D2C, AI, whatever comes after. Oscar's got a whole list of things that come after that we can start working on. But if you start assessing your organization, not just in my in-market performance, not just my efficiency, my growth, my profitability, those are good, but it's my change management performance. Do I have these 8 things in place? Because if I'm missing even one, I'm not going to get the outcome that I'm looking for. And we actually bring this to life with companies when we're working with them. So it doesn't stay theoretical. It can become very actionable, but it does take having that kind of that criteria to measure your progress against.
That is an incredible blueprint. And I feel like it's an episode within an episode here, what you shared. Anyone, go back and listen to this section again, because not only will that be helpful to bringing along management or your organization around AI, just in general, that framework for bringing the team along for any updates in your strategy is incredibly helpful. So thank you for mapping that out. Last question here, and this one I'll toss to you, Oskar. Let's say I'm at a brand. I've got my change management, 8 levers in place and ready to roll. I don't have a lot of resources necessarily to invest in, like the test and learn. What are some of the no-brainer AI applications that are likely to provide value right away? for someone in our industry? What would maybe your top 2 to 3 be?
I would definitely say that where it would make sense, again, if you're a smaller brand and maybe you don't have a lot of resources, number one is you can actually use the creative side to improve your PDP, for example, pages. Maybe actually make sure that you have different content across different retailers. So you can definitely do a lot of that content optimization, even using some of the existing AI models. You can use ChatGPT, you can use Cloud, whatever your legal team will allow you to do it. And then, of course, you have all the DALL-E Midjourney to be able to create graphic assets. I think from that perspective, it's no brainer. The other one is also that, for example, what I mentioned before is like using AI to generate new insights. It's a very low-hanging fruit because you sometimes have a lot of the data, but not necessarily a lot of the time to go through different reviews, go through all of the different data sets, user-generated content that you have out there, and being able to start categorizing, looking at themes, and actually starting to look at what's happening and how is it changing over time. For me, the two different things are like very kind of low money, low impact, but more importantly, a much higher impact, right? But more importantly, the thing about it is like the reason why AI is struggling a little bit with managing the expectation is because a few years back, Chris sent me a book and basically it says for change management, even in the age of AI, we'll have to explain AI, train AI, and sustain AI. And I'll kid you not, after so many projects that we're actually doing on AI, this is what we are basically seeing is that the expectation that AI at the moment is an easy button. But to be honest, what it is, it just requires a lot of work. It requires a lot of clean data that a lot of the brands don't have it. Requires a lot of changing of processes, creating all that change management with organizations. So we have to build that AI muscle to be able to utilize it. And we also need that muscle to recognize which solutions are actually going to make a difference for us and which vendor has a chance at least to follow on their marketing where they're basically saying AI is this silver bullet for everything. We have to be trained and we have to be very conscious because we can't just take things at face value. So being in ChatGPT, being Midjourney, reading up blogs, Twitter, and then if you really have a lot of time, oh my God, Discord. On Discord, if you join the Discord conversation, there is insane amount of information and an insane amount of things that people are actually trying to do. So whatever the time you have, you can actually get into the rabbit hole and enjoy the crazy ride. But it will make you much more informed shopper and it will make you much more informed AI enthusiast to be able to see it's like, hey, where we need to scale down the expectations, where we can dial them up to make sure that we can actually deliver. Because we learned one thing when we joined CPGs, always under promise, over deliver. And AI at the moment is doing the opposite. So the more time you spend on AI, you'll learn to recognize how to really set those expectations right.
It's all about discernment, and there's no easy button for this. You have to spend the time to learn so you know how to assess what is actually providing value rather than the shininess of AI being applied to your tactics and strategies. Chris and Oskar, thank you both so much for taking the time to come on the show today. Hopefully, I'm not replaced by an AI bot in the future, and I can have you back to talk about your next report on the industry and what's ahead. I really appreciate your time today.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for having us.